A couple years ago, I put out my first opinionated video, and oh boy, was it opinionated on a cave story. It was a video discussing my, I'll say, passionate feelings on Cave Story 3D. I was met with a ton of comments, both hateful and kind, and after being plagued with this video having such a divide, I think it's time that I finally even out those scales. No, I'm not kidding, and no, you aren't reading the title wrong. Today, we'll be talking about why Cave Story 3D is in fact amazing. Now, don't get me wrong, I still stand by all my negative feedback about the game that I stated in my first video. I'm not making this video as some form of apology or way to take things back. For this video, I just want to focus on all the good things Cave Story 3D has to offer, and why I can maybe, but only kind of understand why some people may see this as their favorite version of the iconic indie. The easiest thing to compliment about the game is that it is a beautiful remake. Or at least, as beautiful as a remake can look on a 3DS. All the areas in the game have been given a complete from the ground up overhaul, and I love all the new details they added. A lot of 3DS games have this trend where they'll put so much detail in the backgrounds just to take full advantage of the 3D feature, and Cave Story 3D is no different. There's so much detail in the backgrounds alone, it's so easy to forget all the new details they added in the foreground. My biggest example of this is with Mimica Village. All of the cool new details they added, like the water puddles and river flowing with the flowers, and the depth of the cave that they added was just so distracting that I didn't even realize that this middle portion was a goddamn tree. And yes, I really do mean it when I say that this tree detail is rad as hell. Cave Story, as many of you know, has very simple backgrounds. There's usually a pattern or solid color filling the room, and it's very charming given that the game was made by just one guy. But 3D decides to go so far with its background detail that you can't help but be distracted by it on your first playthrough coming from the original. They even went out of their way to change up some of the smaller areas by changing an element about them that you never really notice at first glance but can maybe appreciate later on. For example, I always thought it was weird that in Egg Corridor 1, you had to actually enter the eggs to complete the area. Well, in Cave Story 3D, they change it, and it turns out Quo enters a small little room behind the eggs to access the computer and get the keycard. I know, it seems odd to hype up a detail like egg areas, but these small details are things I love about the game, as well as many other fans. Another very easy thing I gotta give to the game is its soundtrack. For those who might not have known, Cave Story 3D is where we get the remastered soundtrack from. The music was made by Danny Baranowski, and he really did do so much justice to a ton of these songs. And I'll be the first to say that not every song does a great job of keeping the spirit, but most of the songs in the soundtrack really are their own respectful and unique takes of their original Organia counterparts, and I still bump the remastered music in my playlist to this day. I know so many people have stated on my comments how much they love remastered, so go ahead and thank 3D for that. Not to mention that the remastered soundtrack isn't even all the remix music they did for 3D. For those who don't know, Cave Story 3D's website had official remixes of some songs from the game just made for browsing the website. While nothing here is on par of the actual remastered soundtrack, they are still official remixes of Cave Story music, and I can't help but love them for that. While small, even just the attempt of adding new areas into Cave Story was so appreciated, and I will always gas up these new areas. They aren't long, and they aren't anything that'll exactly change how you play or see the game, but having some new variety to the game helps so much. It is still a genuine crime that these areas are exclusive to Cave Story 3D to this day. And it's a genuine crime that the backgrounds are as well too. I would gladly take some background revamps in future ports of original Cave Story. Also, me being a physical game collector, I gotta mention the fact that this was the first ever version of Cave Story to literally hit store shelves, which has honestly gotta be really rad from the perspective of Daisuke Amaya, the creator of Cave Story. It was the first time his work was ever sold over the counter, and it was being sold worldwide. Not to mention, the physical release came with its own holographic sleeve in early sales. Really, this release felt like the team behind it was so excited to bring Cave Story to the big leagues, with other premium titles being stocked right next to it, rightfully where the game belongs. I know it's much easier for indie games to get physical releases nowadays, but back then, seeing Cave Story get any kind of physical release for the first time was genuinely magical, and I have to thank Cave Story 3D for that feeling. As much as I truly dislike Cave Story 3D in the end, I gotta admit that there was some magic behind it existing, and I'm glad to have it a part of Cave Story's history. The other ports of the game I feel far surpass it in quality and assurance of just playing a better game. But Cave Story 3D has so much to it, and I just can't help but feel like that, to me personally, that this was the last time Nicholas really cared about the game. Cave Story still gets some love every once in a while from the publisher, but when you compare modern releases to 3D, it really feels like Nicholas would rather make another safe port of the game than attempt something completely new with the IP. And sure, not a lot of people like the game, but just looking at the comments in my last video shows me that there are so many more people who did love the game. Even review-wise, the game crushed it, getting 4 out of 5s and 9 out of 10s, with many reviews giving it the same praise I did in this video. If it wasn't obvious by now, I really should say that just because I didn't like the remake doesn't mean that it didn't make me happy or appreciate it for what it was, or even what it could have been. Hell, I literally bought the game after all. While I won't take anything I said in my first video back, I will say and admit that Cave Story 3D, in the end, is pretty amazing. It looks great when you can see it, has tons of new inclusions and additions, and it even showed that, at least at one point, Cave Story was strong enough to go above and beyond for, and it makes me happy that people are just as passionate about it now. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you all in my next video, and I really hope that you enjoyed this one. Definitely tell me some good memories you maybe had with Cave Story 3D, because that was my favorite part about my last video. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and play some Cave Story 3D. And until my next one, Nerdieo is out.
Cave Story 3D is the newest edition of Pixel's much-celebrated retro masterpiece, and it's pretty incredible. Revamped 3D graphics bring new life to the game's explosive side-scrolling gameplay, offering up an expansive world full of high-speed shoot-'em-up combat, taking it to swarms of oddball enemies with some flashy weaponry. Now, if you haven't had a chance to play this classic, what's wrong with you? Cave Story 3D is out now.